The third of the rhetorical modes of writing that we are primarily concerned with in our disciplines, not that the narrative doesn't matter, but considering the variety of genres that we use predominantly, this is what we're focusing on. So, the third such rhetorical mode is the argumentative. Again, remember that the argumentative was positioned at the top of the pyramid that's constructed by the descriptive or expository and the analytical. We're slowly building towards taking a stand, making a point, proposing something. So we have talked about the analytical and the descriptive, and now we're focusing on very clearly understanding the argumentative function of text, the job that it performs in the process. Once again, let us look at a sample, and for us, this sample is going to come from a text that we recommended as part of your reading list. The text is very brief, it's only 3 paragraphs, and it's going to provide a sample of how we can work with the students as well, not necessarily with this text but with others. The text is authored by Estram in 2015. It's part of a larger book called Naming What We Know, a book that deals with threshold concepts of writing studies. And this particular little essay of 3 paragraphs focuses on this claim that disciplinary and professional identities are constructed through writing. The first paragraph of the text, please read it very carefully along with me, tells us that while people can negotiate how identities are constructed through writing in a variety of contexts, many first encounter unfamiliar disciplinary or professional discourse in college. In most American colleges and universities in the United States, it's also true of us, students complete general education courses, which are introductory courses designed to introduce students to both ways of thinking and disciplinary perspectives within the university before continuing on to specialized courses within their chosen disciplines or fields. So, with this sentence, we're told that the students embark on a trajectory that moves from the more generic to the more specialized. This increasingly discipline specific learning process, the text tells us, involves both the simple acquisition of new knowledge and, quote, an expansion and transformation of identity of a learner's sense of self. End quote, and we're told what the source for the quote is. Writing as a means of thinking, a form of inquiry and research, and a means for communication within a discipline. Remember, these are also the things that we talked about. So, this kind of writing plays a critical role in that identity transformation and expansion. This is what this paragraph claims. Disciplines like ours, like design or built environment disciplines like architecture or urban planning, disciplines have particular ways of asking and investigating questions enacted through and demonstrated in writing. So, via writing, you can see the way in which disciplines ask their questions. Teachers or researchers demonstrate their membership in disciplines by using writing in ways validated by the disciplines. So, the way you write for science is not the way you write for architecture, is not the way you write for design. You have to write in your own disciplinary way in order to show that you belong. It is thus through writing that disciplines and writers are both enacted and encountered by writers, first as students and then as professionals throughout their careers. So, what is happening here is that the text operates starting from various premises which are articulated. What do I mean by that? We mean statements with which we might be able to agree, or statements with which we might be persuaded to agree by being given references. These statements are as follows. The first premise: most people are introduced to the way their disciplines think and write in college. What am I doing? I am simplifying these. I am writing these in my own language to make sure I understand what this paragraph really wants to tell me. The second premise, again in my own language: writing follows the logic of the discipline. Writing follows the way of thinking of the discipline, the way in which questions are asked and how in a discipline. The third premise, students they are asked to demonstrate their knowledge of the discipline by approaching writing in that particular way. The fourth premise that this paragraph gives us, teachers and practitioners, people who already know the discipline, write in this way, write like the discipline asks them. Then what we have is something called a warrant, which is what enables us to make the jump from the premises, the things that we can agree on, to the claim that the text is making, which is what the text wants to convince us of. So the warrant here is that writing transforms the students' identities. It enables them to internalize and embody the discipline's norms. And through this warrant, we reach what the paragraph wants to convince us of, which is what? Which is that by writing like their disciplines ask them to, students become more like the professionals. So, writing is a means by which students become more like the professionals in that discipline through this process. Here, the claim we have to remember is that writing plays a critical role in transforming and expanding the identity within disciplinary learning. This is how the text itself frames it. So, what we have encountered is the argumentative mode of writing, whose job it is to make a claim and then convince the reader of the validity of this claim by using logical reasoning, evidence, and very often even addressing counter arguments. We've seen that in this paragraph, and you can already notice how the level of complexity has increased from plain description through analysis to actually taking a risk and proposing something. A claim is a proposition that I'm making, right? So now what we will come to realize a little bit later is what constitutes a claim for the first paragraph becomes a premise, becomes a stepping stone for the larger text. But before we do that, let's look at the next paragraph and try to do the same. So the next paragraph, the second, tells us that identities are complex expressions and embodiments of who someone is, right? What is this? This is a premise which is definitional. It tells us that identities are expressions of who someone is. Then we move on to the second sentence. For many students in college encountering disciplinary writing for the first time, discipline-specific writing threatens their sense of self because these ways of thinking and writing are so distinct from other more familiar reading and writing practices, such as those valued at home and in other communities in which the students are members. Now, this is complex. It's one sentence, but it packs a lot. So then what we try to do is to divide it, because we want to see very clearly what are all the stepping stones, what are all the premises. So one statement would be that the student's sense of self or identity before college is formed by home and community. Now here what is implicit is the warrant that there is a specific way in which the community thinks, in which the community writes. And through this warrant, we take the next step, which is in the same sentence, which is to say that college writing differs from and challenges writing at home and in the community. Then we move on to the next sentence in the paragraph. As writers continue to work in the academy and beyond, they negotiate and challenge disciplinary identities via writing, finding ways to traverse the differing implicit and explicit expectations. The process of learning to manage those tensions contributes to the formation of new identities, for as people progress through their major disciplines, writing increasingly complex texts in the process, they are also writing themselves into the disciplines. Now this brings to us another premise, which is what? Which is that writers learn the conventions of writing in the discipline. And another one, which is that writers bring to the discipline their own writing. So it's not just that they learn and they leave everything else behind, but the home form of writing, the community form of writing, is something that each writer brings to college with them, and when they write, you can see this. So, what we have here is a warrant, which is that the process of negotiation takes place through writing between their home writing or their community writing and the kind of writing that the discipline requires. It is these premises lined up that allow us to reach the claim. What is the claim? The claim is that the students' identities change by writing in their discipline. And we're told in the last sentence of the paragraph that that process of identity formation is interwoven with learning the writing conventions, practices, habits, and approaches of their discipline. Which means what? Which means that as the student learns the conventions and practices and everything, and as the student brings their own existing writing practices in the negotiation, we also have a process of identity formation. So everyone is not made into a standardized professional. Everyone who learns to write an essay in architecture does not become the same kind of architect. Why not? Because each person also brings themselves, their own practice, their own writing from their own community and from their past, and they bring this into the negotiation that is the process of writing. Now, if we pay such close attention to what this paragraph is doing in the process of arguing this claim, if we do this, we identify the premises and the stepping stones and are able to really understand why the text claims what it claims. And we take a similar step with the last paragraph where we're told for many people, the idea that writing is not merely a matter of recording one's research or thoughts, but is in fact a process linked to the development of new professional identities is troublesome. What does it mean? It means people usually believe that writing is just an expression of thoughts. It means that people find it hard to believe that writing also forms the self. So these are two premises that are given to us in one sentence. Writing can appear to be an act of transcription or representation of processes, not an expression of identity. Many prevalent descriptions of the relationship between writing and research neutralize and generalize disciplinary or professional writing into a last step in the research project, one in which research results are written up. So we're told as a premise that very often writing is presented as the last step of writing up the research. And then we are told, or it is implied, that this is not really the case. We're told by the text, approaching disciplinary writing as an act of identity and affiliation illuminates how writing in new contexts is not only about learning abstract conventions, but also about learning how to be within a group with social conventions, norms, and expectations. So we're told that writing is in fact an act of identity and affiliation, and we're given the claim of this paragraph, which is that through writing, the writer learns how to be or how to behave in a group of their peers. This applies to our students if you think about it. We ask them to write design proposals, we ask them to write design intents, and by learning how to do that kind of writing, the student learns how to be a designer, how to be an architect, how to learn the language of the designer and the architect and use it to socialize their knowledge. So each one of these paragraphs has lined up a set of premises for us and has arrived at a specific claim which it has justified. And the text overall takes another step. It uses the claims that each paragraph has generated as premises on which to anchor the larger claim of the text. So if you now look only at the claims of each paragraph. By writing as prescribed by the discipline, students become more like professionals. But when they write, the students negotiate writing, and in the process, their identities change. And therefore, through writing, the writer, the student, learns how to be or behave in the group of their peers. This is the larger trajectory of the argument that is offered by the text. So, in a text that is argumentative, what you have is a situation in which there is a larger argument that very often is difficult to capture, and each paragraph contributes through its claim to this larger argument. In our case, you will also notice something that very often happens with argumentative writing, which is the fact that the text is addressing expected counter arguments. People say, people believe, but we disagree, and this is what we propose instead. So, the words that we've been using are words like claim, premise, warrant. Let's revise what these things are. The claim is what you want to prove, what you want to convince the reader of, and you want to do that logically, not just emotionally. The premises are the statements that we can agree on at each point, statements that can be supported, on which the claim is based. Claims made in one paragraph become premises for the next paragraph, become premises for the larger argument. And warrants, which are difficult to identify sometimes because very often they are implicit, they are assumptions. Warrants are logical hinges of the argument. They are turning points that allow us to make connections between the premises and the claims. So, when you look at argumentation in our writing, what you realize is that we talk about argument as the larger claim. Right? In argumentative writing, the way we use words, we usually have one larger argument for the whole book or the whole essay, and everything inside the text is used to justify that. So, for us, it is a good reading practice to be able to identify this larger argument, and it is good to be able to say, how is our argument substantiated? By saying these are the assumptions, these are the premises, this is how it's explained, illustrated, this is how it appeals to existing research, which is research by which a claim has already been justified. So, we work through the steps of analysis to demonstrate a specific claim. And as we've seen, argumentative writing very often also addresses possible counter arguments. So, how do we know if a text is argumentative? If a text is trying to convince us of something, if a text offers a larger claim, then we're looking at argumentation. And this is an important distinction to make in terms of reading, but also in clarifying to our students what we expect of them. In our discipline, these are some of the most common types of arguments that we find. An argument of fact or a factual argument. For example, most city beautification projects lead to gentrification. Yeah, we're stating something as we see it, but in order to make our point, we need verification, we need data, we need objectivity, precision, we need to look at counter arguments, right? But this is one type of argument that can be made. We can also make an argument of explanation. Everyone agrees on the fact, unlike the argument of fact or the factual one, where people might not agree from the beginning. But if everyone agrees on the fact, but people don't agree on why it occurs, then we call that an argument of explanation. For instance, we all agree that our cities are becoming unlivable because of market driven and ghettoized housing. So we agree with the statement that the cities are becoming unlivable. The why and wherefore is what we need to prove. Again, we need logical relationships between the identified cause and the claim to be established by the rest of the text. Then we also have something called a proposal argument. For example, we propose the following: subsidized units in all housing societies open to all demographics, would solve the problem of ghettoization in the city. What is this? This is my solution to a problem. What does it require? It requires for me to identify the problem, to analyze it, then to articulate the proposal, and to say why this proposal answers the problem, just like Priya was doing for her classes. And then we have something called the position argument, which is where you take a standpoint. For instance, housing projects that use underpaid labor cannot be called sustainable. What am I doing? I'm defining sustainability in a way that allows me to take this stand. So, just to understand how this works in practice, when I have a proposal argument, for example, and this would apply to all the others as well, what I do is to make the claim, subsidized units, and whatever I have to say about them. Then I will have to say, this is how I identify the problem. This is the issue that I notice. These are the consequences of this issue. Then I will have to propose my solution. What is my plan? I want to implement a policy that requires the following. And for each of these aspects, I will need to use justification and reasoning. Of what kind? Looking at social integration, looking at economic benefits, looking at precedents. And very often, what we ask of our students is to make such proposals. When we do that, we need to tell them that these are the kinds of steps they need to take in order to make their argumentative writing work well. In working with our students, we use argumentation when we ask them to listen to lectures that people deliver or when we ask them to read. And at that point, the focus is on identifying arguments that are made and identifying whether they are well substantiated. So, should we believe this or not? Should we take it seriously or not? We also ask them at a higher level to identify relationships between arguments across texts. So Gautam Ban may say one thing, but someone else might disagree. Are we able to see the claims, put them side by side, and see the points where they come into conflict, the points where the premises are different, the points where the assumptions are different? These are the aspects that make for critical reading. When it comes to writing, which we ask the students to do, what we want them to do is to respond to arguments that someone has made or to articulate their own claims. These claims could be standpoints, solutions, interventions, whatever they are. And when they do that, something like explaining why one's design is the right response to a problem, to an analysis of context, what they're doing is they're using their argumentation rhetorical mode in combination with analytical, with narrative, with descriptive in order to justify what they propose. And finally, every jury, every dialogue, every debate, every oral argument will require this skill. So the more our students practice it, the more they will practice what we usually call critical thinking without actually defining it. This is what critical thinking refers to. And this is the end of this cluster. We will later on look at narrative as a rhetorical mode, which does not come into as much of our text as perhaps we would like it to, but it's still an important mode that we need to be concerned with.